The moment my name echoed across the stadium, it rose into the warm June air like a note held too long, trembling, searching for a place to land. Caleb Morgan. I stepped forward, the sun hitting my face as the crowd erupted for the graduate before me. Parents cheered, siblings whistled, grandparents waved homemade signs painted in thick, uneven strokes. Joy spilled from every corner of the field, except mine. 7 chairs in the family section bore small white cards with my last name neatly printed across the front. 7 empty chairs, no shifting silhouettes, no familiar faces, not even a late-arriving figure jogging down the aisle with an apologetic smile. Just stillness. I forced a breath and walked across the stage. The dean shook my hand. A camera flashed, and somewhere in the crowd a photographer called out gently, "Look toward your family." I did. And there was nothing. It shouldn't have surprised me. In my family, I was never the celebrated child. Lydia, my older sister, had been the star since birth straight. As internships lined up like dominoes, Jacob, the youngest, was the charmed one protected from every mistake he made. And me, I was the quiet space between them. The kid who sketched buildings in the margins of homework, the one they all assumed would figure something out eventually. But even knowing all that, something inside me still cracked when I stepped off the stage and into the crowd of hugging families. I stood beside a maple tree at the edge of the stadium holding my diploma while watching students wrap themselves in arms that cared enough to show up. Someone bumped my shoulder gently. "Congratulations, man. Your folks around here?" I smiled like it didn't sting. They must have gotten caught in traffic. The lie tasted thin. I slipped my hands into my pockets, feeling the rough ridge of the stitched leather portfolio I'd repaired years ago, my first blueprint for a dream no one believed in. That afternoon, while everyone else drove home with car windows down and laughter trailing behind them, I walked alone to my old Toyota parked 3 blocks away. I didn't know it then, but those 7 empty chairs would shape every decision I made afterward. Sometimes silence isn't just quiet, it's direction. Looking back, those empty chairs weren't an accident. They were a paterna, a quiet continuation of a childhood spent learning to take up as little room as possible. I grew up in a modest beige house on Willow Bend Drive, the kind with a yard my father kept trimmed to military precision and a mailbox that leaned just slightly like it was tired of carrying our name. Inside, everything revolved around Lydia's trophies and Jacob's mishaps. My victories were the kind no one noticed, and my failures were the kind everyone assumed I'd handle on my own. I remember one winter morning when I was 12. The furnace had stopped working overnight and our breath came out in pale ghosts. Lydia had forgotten her science project, the one due that day. She burst into tears at the kitchen table and Mom flurried around her like she was treating a medical emergency. I had spent a week building my own project, a small wooden model of a wind turbine, sanded smooth blades carefully measured. Without thinking, I slid it across the table. "Here, take mine." They all sighed in relief, grateful. Lydia won 2nd place. No one ever asked what happened to mine. Years later, I saved up from mowing lawns and fixing fences around the neighborhood to buy my first real drafting tool set. I kept the box unopened on my desk for 2 days, just admiring it, imagining the structures I could design with it. Then Dad tapped on my door. Son Jacob forgot to pay his parking tickets. Need to take care of it before it doubles. Before I could answer, he picked up the box, flipped it over, saw the price tag. "You're responsible," he said, slipping the money from my desk. "He'll learn eventually." He never paid me back. And then there was the night my old leather portfolio tore. It was the only thing I had to carry my sketches, so I sat under a weak lamp in my freezing room, stitching it by hand with thread I found in Mom's sewing kit. My fingers shook from the cold, but I refused to throw it away. That crooked seam stayed with me through high school, college, and every job after. A reminder that I grew up in a house full of people, yet learned to patch my dreams alone. I didn't resent them then. but each memory became a quiet stone placed along the path that would eventually lead me away from them. 8 months slipped by after graduation. Quiet months, clean months, the kind that leave you with more questions than answers. I worked wherever someone would trust a young architect with more ambition than credentials. Some days I drafted kitchen remodels for retirees downsizing their lives. Other days I patched up blueprints no one else wanted to touch. I slept on an office couch more often than I slept in my apartment. But slowly, brick by brick, hour by hour, things began to shift. In late January, a contractor I'd helped on a small renovation called me about an abandoned commercial property on the east side of Portland. Evergreen Marketplace Plaza. 3 decaying buildings, broken signage, and weeds tall enough to hide a child. Everyone else saw a lost cause. I saw potential. I spent weeks walking the property alone at dusk, running my fingers along rusted railings, imagining light returning to the windows. I studied zoning laws, crunched numbers until my vision blurred, and met with every lender who didn't slam the door immediately. Then, on a rainy Thursday morning, I signed the acquisition papers. It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was the first time in my life I had chosen myself. 2 weeks later, the Portland Business Journal published an article about the 25-year-old architect reviving a forgotten plaza. My name sat right beneath a photo of the building, raw and unflattering, but mine. Emails from developers, contractors, and reporters flooded in. Former classmates reached out, some with congratulations, others with thinly veiled curiosity. But my family, not a word. I stared at the article on my phone while sitting in my old Toyota parked outside a job site, engine humming beneath my hand. For a moment, I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt still. Then my phone buzzed with a new message. Richard Morgan. My father. Family dinner. 6 p.m. Important discussion. A second message followed. Don't be late. No congratulations. No mention of the article. Just a summons like I was an employee they hadn't promoted yet. I sat there in the fading winter light, watching raindrops slide down my windshield. It had been 8 months of silence. And suddenly they remembered my number. I didn't know what they wanted. But I knew this much: they weren't calling because they missed me. I didn't drive straight to my parents' house. Something in me wouldn't allow it, not yet. Instead, I turned into the small parking lot behind my office, the same converted warehouse where I'd spent countless nights sketching until my eyes burned. The building groaned whenever the wind pushed against it, and the fluorescent lights inside hummed with their usual tired persistence. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the only place that had ever felt like mine. I climbed the narrow staircase, pushed open the heavy metal door, and let the familiar cool air wrap around me. My desk sat in the corner, cluttered with measuring tools, old coffee cups, and rolls of tracing paper held down by mismatched mugs. But my eyes went straight to the leather portfolio, resting exactly where I'd left it. I lifted it gently. The seam I had stitched at 12 was still crooked, still imperfect. Yet somehow it looked stronger than anything I had gained from my family. Years of wear had softened the leather, but the thread, the one I had pushed through trembling fingers, held firm. I sat down and opened it. Inside lay pages of contracts, valuation reports, architectural mock-ups, and at the very bottom, the signed acquisition documents for Evergreen Marketplace Plaza. I ran my thumb along the edge of the final page, feeling the embossed seal. My father's message hadn't said why he wanted me there at 6, but I already knew. Harborline Industrial Redevelopment. His legacy project was running out of capital. Word around Portland's development circles was that the city wouldn't consider funding unless the proposal included Evergreen Marketplace as an anchor lot, and Evergreen Marketplace belonged to me. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the distant sound of traffic outside the window. Not so long ago, I would have walked into that dinner desperate to be accepted, to be useful, to be finally seen. But tonight felt different. Tonight I wasn't the forgotten middle child. I was the owner of the one property they needed most. I closed the portfolio and pressed the cover flat with my palm. The soft thud felt like the closing of a chapter I'd been trapped in for years. At 5:32 p.m., I stood, grabbed my coat, and turned off the lights. I didn't rehearse what it'd say. Words had never worked with them anyway. This time, I wasn't going there to talk. I was going there with proof. The drive to my parents' neighborhood felt strangely cinematic, like I was moving through old photographs instead of real streets. Portland's early evening light was fading, turning the sky into a muted gray-blue that made every memory sharper. I passed the gas station where Dad once lectured me for 20 minutes about real careers after catching me sketching building facades in the car. I passed the church parking lot where Lydia left me standing in the rain because she didn't feel like waiting after soccer practice. Then the long hill leading into Willow Bendone. I used to walk alone at 16 when everyone else forgot to pick me up. Every turn whispered a quiet reminder, don't expect warmth. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always had, perfect lawn-glowing porch light, the Morgan family image carefully maintained. A place that photographed better than it lived. The door opened before I reached it. My father filled the frame like he was greeting a client rather than his son, who hadn't heard from him in 8 months. His eyes swept over me, stopping briefly on the portfolio in my hand. "You're right on time," he said. Not hello, not welcome home, just punctuality, his favorite virtue. Inside the dining room was already set, 6 chairs, crystal glasses, cloth napkins folded so precisely my mother must have ironed them twice. But the atmosphere wasn't that of a family dinner. It was the tense stillness of a boardroom. Lydia sat tall at the table, swirling wine like she'd been waiting for an applause. Jacob sprawled back in his chair, tapping his phone against the wood, barely looking up. And next to my father, dressed in a suit that cost more than my first 3 months of rent, sat Charles Benton, Dad's longtime business partner. My mother hovered behind her chair, smiling in that brittle way she did when she hoped a smile could hold everything together. They all looked at me, some curious, some calculating, none affectionate. I took the seat at the far end of the table, the one they always left for me, as if distance made everything easier for them. My portfolio rested quietly on my lap. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's get straight to it," he said. His tone told me everything. This wasn't about family. This was a transaction dressed up as dinner. My father folded his hands on the table the way he always did before delivering instructions rather than invitations. "We have an opportunity on the table," he began, nodding toward Charles Benton. Charles leaned forward, elbows planted firmly, eyes sharp behind his glasses. "The Harbor Line Industrial Redevelopment," he said, as if unveiling something momentous. "It's a valuable district, strong projections, high return. But—" He paused, letting the silence hang like an unspoken accusation. "We need additional capital to secure the anchor lot. It's time for you to be part of something meaningful, Caleb." Lydia lifted her glass, smiling like a teacher indulging a child. "It's generous, honestly. You'd get to learn from real experience this way." Jacob chuckled, low eyes still on his phone. "Yeah. Just don't screw it up." Mom placed a hand on my arm, soft but unsure. "Sweetheart, this could be good for you. You've always wanted to belong to something bigger." I let their voices wash over me, a familiar wall of overlapping expectations and dismissals. Not one of them mentioned my degree. Not one of them mentioned the article about Evergreen Marketplace. Not one of them said we're proud of you. They weren't here to connect. They were here to collect. Dad cleared his throat again, signaling his favorite part, the summary. "You come in with the funding," he said, "and we guide the project. Everyone wins. Everyone except me." I rested my fingers on the edge of the leather portfolio in my lap. "Why now?" I asked quietly. They all paused, an uncomfortable beat passing between them. Charles answered first. Because you're finally in a position to contribute, and the city needs confirmation of financial backing within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Perfect timing, just enough urgency to make me feel obligated, not enough to let me think clearly if I were still the boy they remembered. But I wasn't. They continued talking, numbers, deadlines, projections, but their words floated like static. What struck me wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. No apology for the graduation. No acknowledgement of the silence. No hint of recognition that I'd built anything of my own. Just expectation. Just need. Just entitlement. When their voices finally softened, I lifted the portfolio and placed it on the table in front of me. The soft thump cut through their sentences like a dropped gavel. I did come for an important discussion, I said. Just not yours. The room froze the moment my portfolio touched the table. Lydia's wine glass stopped midair. Jacob finally looked up from his phone. Even Charles Benton leaned back slightly, sensing a shift he hadn't anticipated. I unfastened the worn leather flap, the same one I had stitched as a boy, and slid a neat stack of documents toward the center of the table. Their edges caught the candlelight. I brought something you might want to see, I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. Charles reached first, curiosity overpowering his practiced composure. As he skimmed the first page, his expression changed, slowly, steadily, like a man watching a bridge collapse in the distance, powerless to stop it. Evergreen Marketplace, he whispered. His face drained. This is the acquisition. My father snatched one of the documents, eyes darting across the signatures, the seal, the dates. His jaw clenched so hard a vein pulsed at his temple. You bought the entire plaza, he said, voice strained as if the words hurt to speak. The anchor lot. I nodded. 3 months ago. Lydia's glass slipped from her fingers and clinked against the table. Jacob muttered something under his breath that sounded like disbelief mixed with panic. Dad pushed the papers back toward me, breath shallow. Caleb, you knew we were pursuing that property. No, I corrected gently. I knew the city was pursuing it. I don't wait for opportunities to come to me anymore. Charles rubbed his forehead. Without Evergreen Marketplace, the Harbor Line proposal has no anchor. No anchor means no funding. No funding means your project dies. I finished for him. Yes. A heavy silence settled over the table, thicker than any argument Wed ever had. Lydia looked at me as if seeing a stranger. Jacob stared at the documents like they were written in fire. Dad finally spoke, soft, wounded, angry. Why would you do this to your own family? I exhaled slowly, letting years of swallowed words rise to the surface. When I walked across that stage 8 months ago, I said there were 7 empty chairs with our name on them. 7. You didn't come for me then. Don't ask me to come running for you now. Their faces fell, each in their own way, shock, guilt, indignation, regret. I closed the portfolio with a quiet finality. You wanted an important discussion, I said. This is it. For a long moment no one spoke. The air in the dining room felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My mother was the first to move. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached toward me, stopping just short of touching my sleeve. Caleb, we didn't know how to make things right, she whispered. We thought giving you space would help. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I noticed how tired her eyes were. But tiredness isn't the same as innocence. Love doesn't hide behind silence. Lydia straightened in her chair, color rising in her cheeks. So, you think buying a piece of property makes you better than us? She snapped. You've always been dramatic, Caleb. Always the victim. Jacob scoffed under his breath. Man, you're acting like missing one graduation is the end of the world. My father shot him a warning glare, but Jacob kept talking nerves, unraveling his bravado. "You should be grateful Dad is even offering you a spot in this deal. Most people your age would kill for that." I felt something settle inside me then, something calm and absolute. "This isn't about the project," I said quietly. "It's about the pattern." Dad's brow furrowed. "Pattern. The years you took from me," I replied. "The nights you left me waiting outside that school, the times you called my work a hobby, the money you took because I was responsible. You never apologized. You never even acknowledged it." My mother's voice cracked. "We didn't think it mattered that much. You never said anything." I gave a small, tired smile. "I did say something, Mom. You just didn't hear it." Lydia rolled her eyes, but for once Jacob didn't laugh. He just stared at the table, jaw tight, as if some part of him recognized the truth he'd never bothered to witness. Dad pushed back in his chair, shoulders sinking. "We're family," he murmured. "That has to count for something." I shook my head gently. "A family shows up." Silence fell again, this time not angry, but hollow. I gathered the documents, slid them back into the portfolio, and stood. My chair scraped softly against the hardwood, a small sound that somehow felt louder than everything said that night. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm just done explaining myself." Then I walked away from the table, and not a single person followed. The night air met me like an old friend, cool, honest, uncomplicated. I stepped off the porch and let the door close behind me, its soft click drawing a clean line between the life it lived and the one I was finally choosing. My Toyota sat alone in the driveway, the same way I had sat alone so many times in that house. I slid behind the wheel, placed the portfolio in the passenger seat, and let my hands rest on the worn steering wheel. For a moment, I didn't start the engine. I just breathed. Through the windshield, I could see figures moving around the dining room shadows, gesturing, heads bowed, a hand lifted and then dropped. But I couldn't hear a single word. And for the first time, that silence didn't sting. It felt earned. The engine rumbled to life, and I headed down Willow Bend Drive past the trimmed hedges and identical porch lights of the neighborhood. Each street carried a ghost of a younger version of me. At the corner by the old oak tree, I saw a flash of memory, Lydia telling her friends she didn't feel like babysitting and leaving me standing there in the cold. 2 blocks down, I passed the small park where Jacob bragged that Dad bailed him out of every mistake, because that's what dads do for their real kids. And then the long hill, the one I used to walk alone at 16 when Dad forgot to pick me up from school after a late club meeting. I remembered watching other kids climb into warm cars while I pulled my jacket tighter and told myself it didn't matter. But tonight, as my headlights traced the familiar curve of the hill, it looked smaller, less like a wound, more like a landmark I no longer needed to carry. The city opened up as I merged onto the freeway, Portland's skyline rising in soft gold lights ahead of me. My penthouse tower stood at the far end of the district, steel and glass reaching into the night sky like a quiet promise. When I pulled into the underground garage, the guard at the desk gave me a small nod. "Evenin', Mr. Morgan." And just like that, the weight in my chest loosened. Upstairs, the elevator doors opened to the private landing. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The quiet wasn't empty. It was peaceful. For the first time, the silence felt like home. The soft click of the penthouse door closing behind me felt different that nightless, like shutting out the world, more like finally stepping into my own. The city lights spilled across the hardwood floors, casting long, quiet shadows that stretched toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. I set the portfolio on the marble kitchen island. The stitched seam, the one my 12-year-old hands had sewn under a flickering lamp, caught the glint of the pendant lights above. A crooked, imperfect line, but strong, still holding. I brushed my thumb along it, realizing that everything I had built this space, this life, had grown from learning to patch what others left undone. Across the room, the city shimmered. Portland at night is a calm kind of beautiful, not loud, not demanding, just steady, almost forgiving. I walked to the window and leaned my forehead gently against the cool glass, watching headlights cross bridges I once stood under, dreaming of a different life. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from my mother. "We didn't know how to fix what we broke, Caleb. Please don't give up on us." I didn't open the thread, but I didn't delete it either. Some wounds don't close with an apology. Some apologies don't arrive in time to heal anything. And some families don't realize they've lost you until they need something only you can give. I took a slow breath, letting the quiet settle into my chest. Not the sharp emptiness of being forgotten, but the soft clarity of finally understanding what I deserved. Growing up, I thought silence was punishment, a cold place you got left in when you weren't enough. But now I knew better. Silence can also be a boundary, a door you close gently so your life can breathe again. I turned off the lights and walked toward the bedroom, the city's glow guiding my way. Behind me, the portfolio rested where I'd left it, a reminder of where I came from and proof of where I'd finally arrived. Before bed, I stepped out onto the balcony, letting the night air wrap around me. The city stretched endlessly beneath my feet, a map of all the roads I had walked alone. Some stories begin the moment we stop waiting for someone to show up.